Thank you very much for joining us again this evening. This is the first of what will be hopefully a monthly series of club support webinars over the course of the coming season. It's very much follows the same format as we had last year, what was then branded BBFA support, but this year is just forming part of a much wider online engagement program with clubs. But the purpose of this really is to try and look at some of the administration of grassroots football clubs and the kind of challenges and issues that may crop up on a weekly basis. I'm joined this evening by my colleague Stacey, who is one of our two new club support officers. So for those clubs who are in Buckinghamshire, you'll get to know Stacey very well over the course of the season with any queries that may crop up. And Stacey will also be manning the chat for me, just keeping an eye if there are any questions. If you do want to pop a question in the chat, you just need to click on the little speech bubble and give you an opportunity to type it in. Or you can also use the online raised hand function, at which point I'll try and find a time to stop and you can unmute yourself and jump on the microphone to ask a question. The session tonight is just going to look at match-based discipline administration for clubs. We always like to start the season by going over this because it is something that probably forms most of the kind of week-to-week business, certainly in the week-to-week engagement with the county FA during the course of the season around any red and yellow cards that come up. It's also something that has a bit of financial liability associated with it, particularly when you look at potentially missing deadlines on some of the admin side or the payment of cases. So we want to make sure that clubs are aware of what your responsibilities are, so that you don't fall foul of those and incur any unnecessary late fees. So the session is going to look at the yellow and red card process. I'm going to then delve a bit into appealing red cards and kind of what the opportunities are there around mistaken identity or wrongful dismissal. We're then going to jump onto a whole game, which we always like to do just to try and show you where everything is, how to navigate around the dashboard and what information is available at your fingertips. And then going to jump back into the presentation after that and just look at some of the what we call continuing misconduct charges, which may crop up later on in the season, but just are applied automatically under FA regulations around some of the kind of, if you accumulate or have the same types of offences cropping up over the course of the season. So I'm going to recap some of the key disciplinary procedures and timelines that clubs are going to need to be aware of throughout the season. I don't want to get too bogged down into the regulations themselves, but obviously underpinning all of the actions that we ask of clubs are very formal regulations that sit within the FA's 600-page handbook. We're not expecting everyone to go home every start of every season and read that cover to cover. So this will just kind of give us a bit of a introduction to those key ones that you need to be aware of and you need to remember week in, week out. I'm just going to explain quickly how the administration works for red and yellow cards from a county FA point of view, first and foremost, so you're aware of what happens before it lands on your door as a charge through the whole game system. Now, in theory, and I always say in theory, but referees should be reporting match-based misconduct, red and yellow cards, to us within 2 days of a fixture being played. Vast majority of our referees are fantastic and they will try and get those to us the same day that the match is played. However, they do have up to 2 days to make sure that that comes through to us at the county. For the vast majority of yellow cards, certainly, we will then issue a charge to the club the same day that it is received in our county offices. And those notifications will go immediately through to clubs via the whole game system. We try and make sure that it doesn't spend any unnecessary time on our desks and it gets out to the clubs as quickly as possible, so you're aware of what charges have been raised and what fees they may then be associated with it. I'm conscious that it doesn't always work as quickly as we may hope, and sometimes certainly there may be delays in referees getting their reports to us for whatever reason. So it's important to note that when we talk about some of the timeframes involved, particularly around how quickly suspensions kick in, that is actually that clock starts ticking from the day of the game rather than the day that you receive notification of a charge. I'll come into that in a little bit more detail shortly. So once a charge has been issued by the county FA, so we've processed that red or yellow card, there's two functions that the club must complete. The first is that the case must be acknowledged. That is going onto the whole game system or completing paperwork and sending it back to the county FA that says it's an acknowledgement from yourself at the club that you're aware of the charge, you're aware of consequences, so any suspension and any fine that's to do with it, but also you provide us with the information we need to make sure that we're managing those the accumulation of cautions and offences throughout the season. So the deadlines for that, for a red card, the acknowledgement must be sent back to the county within 7 days of the case being raised, and for yellow cards, it is within 14 days of the case being raised. Invoices are automatically raised on a Tuesday night into Wednesday, so you'll wake up most Wednesday mornings to a whole game notification to say that a new invoice has been raised, and that invoice must then be paid within 14 days of it being raised. And the consequences for missing any of those deadlines, whether it's for acknowledging a case or for making payment on an invoice, is a 25% late fee. That is based on the total of the case that it applies to. So if it's a £12 yellow card, as it is this season, your 25% late fee is going to be a £3 late fee that's going to be applied onto that. If it's a £40 red card, then obviously it's a £10 late fee that's going to be applied to that. For invoices, it's 25% of the outstanding amount on the invoice. So if you've got both of those cases, a yellow and a red card on the same invoice, and you've missed the payment deadline, then you're going to get a £13 late fee in that example. Now, if you then go on again and miss the deadline of the late fee, the player and the club can face further suspensions for missing those deadlines. Appreciate that may be a bit stringent, but we have that in place just to try and make sure that that kind of discipline administration rolls through and functions quickly throughout the course of the season. The reason it's important for us to get the acknowledgement back is we want to make sure that those repeat offenders are getting the appropriate punishments. If you think about it from a referee's point of view, or from a perhaps the player that's been on the receiving end of the foul tackle, you want to know that if the same player's committing repeat offences, that actually those sanctions are growing in proportion to the number of offences they've committed each season. The way we do that is by making sure we've got the correct player details down for every single case, and we can track them. Ron, I can see you've got a hand up. Do you want to just come in with a question? Ron, are you there? You're on mute, so if you did want to come in, you will need to unmute yourself, or if you can just pop the hand down, and I can carry on. There we go.
Oh, I have. Sorry.
Oh, and you've disappeared, Ron. Okay. If you do want to come back on, just give me a shout. Put the hand up again, and we'll come back to you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can, Ron. Yeah.
Sorry, apologies. Let me get rid of my ugly mush off the camera. Right. My concern on this one is that clubs must acknowledge within 7 days red. So that may mean that if somebody's sent off on a Saturday or a Sunday, they could play the next weekend. Is that correct?
No, it is almost like you've seen what the next slide is going to be, so I'm just going to click over to that now. A suspension for a red card offence will always start 7 days from the date of the offence, and that's regardless of whether the club has received notification from the FA or not.
Okay, thank you.
That is no worries. So in effect, the club should be aware that that player's got sent off, and I think regardless of what the specific offence is, you'll always know there'll be at least a 1-game suspension for a red card. So you should always know to sit them out from the following fixture a week later. The acknowledgement will then confirm, yes, we've got the correct details down for the player on our system, and acknowledges from the club's behalf that, yes, you know the total length of that suspension is going to be. The same applies for accumulation of cautions, so that's one to keep an eye on. I'll come on to the accumulation shortly, but if you do have a player that hits that threshold of 5, 10 or 15 cautions throughout the course of the season, their suspension will always take place 7 days after they've picked up their 5th, 10th or 15th caution.
Alistair, quick question. It's Farouk.
Hi, Farouk.
Why have the costs gone up? Considering COVID and everything else that's going on, I understand, players shouldn't really get yellow cards, but sometimes they get petty yellow cards that nobody else thinks should be a yellow card. It's never a yellow card, but is there a reason the costs have gone up?
I don't think there's no easy reason I can give as to why it's gone up. It is an FA decision. It's not something that obviously we've implemented at the county. All I would say is that £10 fine for a yellow card has been in place for years and years and years without ever having increased. The red card fees went up a couple of years ago, and I think it's just as part of a standard review process from the FA. They've looked at that and deemed that it was appropriate to put on that extra £2 increase. There are other aspects where, if you think about the cautions for sin bins, sin bin cautions, there's no fine associated with those, so it may also help offset some of the effectively what is lost income for the counties through that.
Okay, it's just I'm just saying, costs have gone up everywhere, basically, from pitches to referees and stuff like that. And once again, we're pushing those costs to the players, and then all of a sudden this is an extra cost for them. I mean, maybe it'll give them a bit of discipline and not getting booked, but sometimes, as I said, you get petty yellow cards and it just pushes up the cost. And I've had a few players on our team saying, the affordability is just going up, and I said, well, that's out of our hands. Is it going to drive people away from grassroots football? I can't really answer that, but just a question.
No, I completely get your point. As I said, it has been standard for a long time at £10. So hopefully a £2 increase on a case by case basis won't break the bank. But do completely get where you're coming from with that. So just as we're talking around suspensions. The FA breaks grassroots football down into what they call match-based disciplinary categories. Now, this means that a player that's sent off on one day of the week is still allowed to play on other days of the week if they're registered with other teams. So red card suspensions will be from a match-based disciplinary category only. So if you're sent off for a Saturday team, you'll still be able to play for a Sunday or a midweek team throughout the course of that suspension. For yellow card accumulations, it's exactly the same principle. 5 Saturday cautions mean that you'll be suspended from the next Saturday game. However, you do then also have for the FA competitions, competition-specific accumulations as well. I won't go into them in too much detail here, just because it's quite convoluted around the different thresholds and however many qualifying matches you've got to have played before that actually takes effect. But it is just one to be conscious of if you are playing for one of our more senior sides, that if you get players picking up cautions in the FA competitions, you do need to watch their accumulation within those games. If a player gets a suspension because of a misconduct charge, so this is where as the county FA we've deemed that their actions either warrant further sanctions, or if it's been an incident that's happened after the final whistle or after a player's been sent off. That suspension covers all of those match-based disciplinary categories, and that takes priority over a red card suspension. So let's say a player gets sent off for violent conduct and picks up a 3-game ban from all Saturday football. If during that investigation we determine that he may have mouthed off to the referee after the red card and raised disciplinary charges against him, if that case is heard before the 3-game suspension is up and an additional suspension kicks in, that has to be served before the final Saturday game applies to the suspension. So he would at that point become suspended from all match-based disciplinary categories. Appreciate that's complicated. Thankfully, it's rare, and you can always contact us at the office if you need clarification on a specific suspension. Equally, the information is there in the whole game system, so you can always check the case details and I'll show you how to do that later on, so you can confirm the dates of those suspensions and which games have been applied to them. One thing that's worth bearing in mind when it comes to the suspensions on the whole game system is that a player will remain listed as suspended on your club portal and whole game system until you've added the suspension matches. There's not an integration at the moment between whole game and full time, where fixtures that are scheduled in full time will automatically apply against a suspension in whole game. So as the club, you have to go in and manually add them. And we do really urge clubs to stay on top of that, because it does help you manage your suspensions week to week and see which players are available for you. It's a really quick and easy process. You only have to do it once per game. So if you've got, if you're in an unfortunate position where you've got multiple players suspended for the same fixture, you add the game once and it applies it across all suspensions. I'll show you that process. It honestly, it takes about 30 seconds to do per game, but we'll come on to that in a little while. And whilst we're talking around that accumulation of cautions, just a reminder of the deadlines. They're the same as they've been for a long time now. But this within one match-based disciplinary category is if you accumulate 5 cautions before the 31st of December, it's a 1-game ban. 10 cautions before the second Sunday in April, it's a 2-match ban. And if you then accumulate 15 cautions before the end of the playing season, it's a 3-match ban. And if you do have a player that manages to get to the grand total of 20 cautions before the end of the season, you may want to look at whether he should still be a player, but that would actually go to a disciplinary panel to look at taking further action in those instances. Thankfully, they're very, very rare, so hopefully that won't apply. As much as anything, by that stage, that player will have also had to miss 6 games because of the various accumulation offences. So you're really doing well to be able to hit 20, I think, over the course of the season. One thing that's worth bearing in mind on this is that the accumulation of cautions does include dissent cautions dealt with by a sin bin. So they will still come through the whole game system, you'll still get notified of them, and they will still count towards those accumulation tallies. Craig, I can see you've got your hand up if you want to jump on.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Cool, thanks. I was just wondering, because obviously, as you were saying, we at the EBFA, we don't have every team on the whole game system. So when a player gets a ban, etc., and obviously he's spent his match, me as a secretary, I might not find that out till after the match is played. But yet, is there a way of putting it retrospectively onto the whole game system as spent?
So referees should still be, regardless of the league, referees should still be reporting any misconduct or any match-based discipline through to us at the county within the 2 days. That applies across all leagues, so that will apply across East Berks Alliance. And I think that still the vast majority of them do. So hopefully you won't be in a position where you would be getting a notification from us after the fact. If it is a red card, the responsibility is on the club to make sure you still sit them out, certainly for the next game, 7 days later. And unfortunately, if you do play them, the fact that you haven't received notification from the county is not deemed a valid excuse for infringing a suspension order.
Sorry, so what I meant is like that player may not have played that match through, he just wasn't, he was having a weekend off or whatever.
Yeah.
But then the coach then tells me that he actually served his suspension the next match after that. But he told me that on a Tuesday after he's served his suspension, but I can't then go on to whole game system and retrospectively create a match.
No, you can add a match that's been in the part that's occurred in the past.
All right, it's just how I went across it and it wouldn't allow me. It kept kicking me off.
Okay.
There must be something wrong with my part of the whole game system.
You should be able to. You need to make, both teams will need to be in the whole game system. But if you want to drop us an email with that, we can look into that certainly. But provided the teams are on there, you should be able to create a historic suspension match. There is quite often a bit of you may not be able to do it for a match from last season, but if you send the information through to us, we can definitely do that for you. That's no problem.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Just going to touch on appeals quickly. As Farouk pointed out earlier on, sometimes you do get yellow cards or red cards that you may well disagree with. And under certain specific instances, they can be appealed to us. Now, yellow cards can only be appealed on the grounds of mistaken identity. That is where the referee has actually shown the card and recorded the card against the wrong player. We quite often get it where the referee may have recorded it against the wrong name, particularly if they are names that may be similar, players that share the same surname or share the same first name. We wouldn't tend to classify that as a mistaken identity, and there's certainly no need to kind of go through the formal appeal payment process for that. Tend to look at that as more as an administrative error, and tends to be by contacting the referee, just ask them to double check their records. They'll come back and say, yep, sorry, I just clicked on the wrong player's name when I was putting it into the whole game system. So appeals for mistaken identity really are where player A's committed the offence and the referee has shown a yellow or a red card to player B. So it's clearly got the wrong player on the field of play. So again, any red card then can also be appealed on the grounds of mistaken identity, and straight red cards. So for violent conduct, serious foul play, spitting, denial of goal scoring opportunity and so forth can be appealed on the grounds of wrongful dismissal. The only card that you can't appeal for wrongful dismissal is for abusive language or behaviour. To run through kind of what the two processes are, because they're similar but different, which is always great fun to try and go through. So this is for mistaken identity. So as I said, where the referee has shown the card to the wrong player on the field of play. The appeal must be lodged with the county FA within 3 days of the game, and that can be done through the whole game system, or if you email us and say, look, the referee got this wrong, he sent off Joe Bloggs when it should have been John Smith, then let us know, and we will kind of take that as an intention to appeal, and then talk you through the process and start the ball rolling on that. There is a £50 or a £30 appeal fee, depending on the level of football you play at, but you are required to provide evidence. Now, for a mistaken identity, that needs to be a statement certainly from the player that did receive the card and the player that committed the offence but was not shown the card. If there's any additional evidence you can then provide, particularly any evidence from the manager, from the opposition manager, from the referee holding their hands up and saying they made a mistake, then provide as much as you possibly can. And if you have video evidence, please send it in, because that also, obviously, as you can imagine, makes our lives a lot easier in coming to a decision on these. We will always consider the case by the end of that week. So we have to consider a case of mistaken identity within 7 days and before that automatic suspension kicks in. No attendance is required. It's not a personal hearing in that sense. It's all done based on the paperwork, and then we'll notify you as soon as a decision has been made by one of our panels on that. So that is for mistaken identity. For wrongful dismissal, it's similar, but the deadlines are just slightly different. So for wrongful dismissal, you need to notify us of your intention to appeal within 2 days of the game. You then have until the end of the 4th day to provide us with any evidence that you want to use in that appeal. Again, there's still a £50 or a £30 appeal fee, and the case will be considered that week before the 7 days is up. And again, there's no attendance required. Now, wrongful dismissal is a really tricky case to deal with from our point of view. The threshold that a panel has to meet in order to be satisfied that the red card should be overturned is they have to be satisfied that the referee has committed an obvious error. Effectively, it needs to be shown that the referee's made an absolute howler and is either wrong in law or effectively that no other referee would have come to the same decision that referee had. What it doesn't mean is that if it's a subjective issue, so if you think that it was a harsh red and it should have been a yellow card, or yes, it was a foul, but it wasn't that serious, it won't be successful. Reason for that is because that comes down to the interpretation of the offence. You're still admitting that a foul was committed and an offence was committed, and the referee's assessment of the severity of the offence is final in those situations. So like I said, you really have to be able to show that either the referee was wrong in law, which happens for denial of goal scoring opportunity cases certainly, or that the referee was clearly wrong, and any other referee in that situation would have reached a completely different decision on it. If you ever do have questions around either of those processes, though, please come to us. We've got reference guides that we can send out to you. We'll talk you through the process. We, the office, won't be in a position to advise you whether you should or you shouldn't submit an appeal, or whether you're likely or unlikely to be successful in it. We can only talk to you about process. But again, we can kind of reiterate what that kind of threshold and decision-making process that panel will go through is. Ultimately, as much as anything, we don't want you as clubs to be spending an additional £30 or £50 if it's if you don't think you're going to be successful with that appeal. I am going to jump onto the whole game system now, but before I do that and just kind of look through what information is available on there, I just want to check if there's any questions. I know there's nothing in the chat at the moment, but if anybody would like to put a hand up, by all means do. I can see Ron. Yep, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Alistair. I'm not sure whether you want my question, because it's something I've been speaking to you about via email.
Is it about getting suspensions on full time?
Yeah. Yes. Do you want to talk about that or not? Because in my view, it's an excellent way for clubs to be aware of the players that are suspended, not only playing for their team, but for against their team. And it would save me as a league secretary a lot of time and aggravation, having to look things up all the time. So is there any way that can happen?
I don't think it can happen automatically. I think it's something that as a league secretary on full time, you would have to go in and add the suspension so that it is visible, and you effectively manage that process. I am looking for the guidance on that, so hopefully we'll be able to get that to you. If not, I'm going to put you in touch with one of our other leagues that does put that on, just so they can kind of help you out with that process. But
really appreciate that, because I know other leagues do that, and that's something that I would like to do. Thank you.
Okay, no worries, Ron. Craig, if you want to unmute and jump on.
Yeah, sorry, thanks. So where's the stance then against player safety against the FA rules?
In what sense? Do you want to give me an example?
So we had an incident where a coach removed his team from the pitch in the interest of the safety of players. We got obviously we got the thing through on the whole game system, and it was deemed that he basically went against the FA rules of entering the field of play and removing players from the pitch without the referee's permission. Obviously, I take it that it's gone off the referee's report. However, he's done it on a safety aspect, and it's a very promiscuous area, because he's broken the rules in regards to the FA and the rules that are there for the football, but he's acted in the best interest and safety of the players. Now, whether the referee deems it okay or not, if he'd have carried on and the player had ended up with a broken leg, for example, he would have then been held accountable for that as well. So I think it's a very, it's a bit of an area that I think, I've got my own thing on the referees anyway. Coming from an area where I see referees are not being assessed efficiently, especially young kids that need to be, I think, assessed a little bit more to be able for them to improve. But as a coach, he's caught 50-50 either way, whether he brings it playing on the pitch or not. And I mean, we could have appealed that, but obviously we didn't, because, well, I was advisor. It was probably just easier just to take the hit as such.
So I'm not going to go into specific cases. I am aware of the one that you're talking about, but I can talk about it in general terms.
Yeah.
If there is a confrontation between groups of players, I can understand that coaches may want to try and intervene to help separate them. If they do that, then they need to make sure they're not doing it in a way that may be interpreted as misconduct on their own part, whether they may overstep that boundary into what could be considered violent conduct in how they're separating players. Um,
I think you're getting mixed up on a different case there, Alistair.
okay.
This is that's the older age group. This was one that was under 14s.
Okay.
And all he did, he said to the ref, this is just too much. You need to either get them to get their coach to calm the players down, or I'm taking the players off the field.
So the game management is ultimately the referee's responsibility. And again, maybe I may not be as aware on this specific case than Craig, but in terms of if a manager withdraws his team from the field of players or as a group of players and says we're not continuing, although it may be done, he may be doing that on the grounds of his interpretation of player safety. It's the referee that is still responsible for making the decision on whether the game should continue. If the referee felt that he had it in control and the match was able to continue, it does then become an offence for a manager to remove his team. He's basically causing the abandonment by withdrawing the team against the advice or the wishes or the interpretation of the referee.
Even though we had supporting statements from other parents and spectators stipulating that it was a dangerous game.
Yes, because ultimately it's still the referee's decision as to whether the game should be continuing. What I would say on those ones is it's difficult. If I was the coach and I felt that strongly about the that I was acting in the best interest of the players and I was making the correct decision, I think you've got to take the punishment on the chin to some extent, and have the conviction that yes, I made that decision regardless of whether I get into trouble with it, whether it costs us any fine. I believe that's the right decision to have taken. Our interpretation, though, is that the manager has withdrawn the team and has therefore caused the abandonment because the referee felt it could have continued.
Okay, I accept that.
Okay.
Yeah, I have my reservations, but I accept that.
I know it's a tricky one, but yeah, that tends to be how. Yeah, that's our interpretation of it.
No problem. Cheers.
Okay, because I can't see anything in the chat. I'm going to pop onto whole game, which hopefully is just a case of loading up Internet Explorer. So I'm just going to do a bit of a, hopefully not too much of a whistle-stop tour, but a bit of a run through on whole game and the information that's available to help you with managing discipline through this. Hopefully the screen you can see now isn't a shock to anybody. It's that main dashboard you'll see when you first log into whole game. This is your personal dashboard, so if you have multiple clubs that you're working with, or if you've got club and league roles, they will all appear as different tabs across the top, and the notifications you get will relate to any of the different clubs that you're part of. But on your main landing page, if there has been any cases raised, they will show up as notifications, and you'll see here it's expanded to show 3 different cases, 3 different invoices raised that we've put together as preparation for this evening. You can click into each of those and it gives you a little bit of additional information, but it won't tell you the case information at that point. The other advice we would give, just in order to make sure that this notification page doesn't become too unwieldy, is that once you've seen a notification and you know that it's been acknowledged and it's been dealt with, mark that notification as read. It will then take it off that list so that you know that anything new that's appearing on there is stuff that needs action that you haven't yet looked at. If you do have notifications that you have acknowledged or you have marked as read previously, you can always go back into them up at the top here by clicking all. And that's important as well if you share secretary duties, or you share your chairman may also go in on a regular basis and mark those notifications as read. This way you can always go back in and see historic ones to make sure you're aware of what's been raised. If I go onto the main club dashboard now, you'll see again there's an option to click on the notifications and see any notifications for the club on a club by club basis. And again, if you've got multiple roles with multiple clubs, this may be an easier way for you to manage that, because you'll see different notifications for that specific organisation. If you click the drop down here, you should be able to see current and pending suspensions, but there is a bug in the system with this at the moment, which I flagged with the FA and asked them to look into and try and resolve, because what we're finding at the moment is that active suspensions aren't showing on here. But I'll try and keep everybody up to date with that. But hopefully during the season, you should be able to click on the downward arrow and it will list any current and pending suspensions for players within the club. The main thing, though, that I wanted to focus on this evening is just around the discipline tab. And this is really the main source of your current cases, and where you can find all of the information about the club's disciplinary history over the course of the season, historic season records, and any active cases that you need to acknowledge or pay or deal with. So when you first come onto it, it will only show you those cases which have not yet been acknowledged or have not yet been paid. So you can see here, it's showing a couple of demo cases that we've created for our BBFA demo adult male from a recent fixture. If you look across the top here, though, you can see there have been more offences, 3 in total. So there's 1 non-playing caution that's missing. And if you click on where it says all, that case now comes in, and you can see that this case has actually been acknowledged and paid already. I mentioned earlier about the importance of acknowledging a case, and the way to do that, you click on the case number. That will take you into that specific case file, and that will pull up all the details around the specific offence. So you can see here it gives us the name, that player's date of birth, the offence date, due date, outstanding balance, and that individual's caution tally for the current season. So that's how you're able to see if that player that's picked up a caution over the last weekend is going to be close to hitting that 5, 10 or 15 threshold for the season. To acknowledge, you then just have to click on the blue acknowledge button and get notified that an admin charge is going to be payable and will be invoiced separately. You click on that and that case has now been acknowledged. When we say acknowledged, the information we need is we need to have the player's date of birth and address on the system. That's how we're able to make sure that the same players' offences are all collected under the same player record on our master database. If that date of birth is blank or it doesn't have the address, it won't let you acknowledge at that point. But to add the details, you just click on the player name, comes up with their participant discipline profile, and you can update the details once the page fully loads. Click on that and you can just enter a new email, a new address if they've updated their address and moved recently. It won't let you update the date of birth, but if you hadn't previously entered that, that field would be editable. The red card notices are very much the same, and I'll just click onto that case when it loads back up again. And I'll take you through what the claim process is if you want to lodge an appeal for mistaken identity or for wrongful dismissal. And as you can see, the whole game system is running as fast as always, which is always helpful. Let me see if I click onto the discipline tab, that may take it quicker. So again, if I now just click into the case ID, it will show us all of the details around the red card. So it shows it was red card for violent conduct, again on the 18th, shows the response due date and the outstanding balance. Now on this, if you want to, you can click on the downward button and it shows you how that's broken down. So there's a fine and a discipline admin charge. If that response deadline had been missed, it would then add the late fee and would show that as a late response or a late payment fee as well. Also on this page, it shows you the sanction. So it shows that there is a 3-match ban starting from the 25th of October and shows that it's from playing, from refereeing, it's not a safeguarding suspension, and that it covers all Sunday football only. Further down here, you'll see suspension matches that have already been added, and I'll show you how to add them in a second. And if you want to, you can also download a formal copy of the the discipline letter, and this will give you, again, more details on it. And you may, if you wish to kind of download this either for your own records or to send a copy to the player, just to make sure that they're aware of the suspension, what details that we have on store for them, and how much the fine is going to be, and so forth. If you do want to lodge a claim, within those deadlines of the 2 and the 3 day to lodge a claim, this button will remain blue. Just come down here and click on the reason. It'll tell you if there's a claim fee that's due before the claim can be lodged. And you just click OK, and now that case will be lodged with us at the County FA that's intending to be claimed for wrongful dismissal. Automatically takes you through to a payment screen, because the payment does have to be made up front. And through here, you just enter the relevant details, and that automatically assigns the payment through to the case on our systems and accepts it as a valid claim. In terms of paying cases, there's 2 options or 2 ways of doing that. If it's a case that's already been acknowledged, you can click into the case, and this one's been acknowledged, hasn't it? And down at the very bottom of the screen gives you the option to make payments. If I come down here, you'll see this. So simply click tick to pay when it wants to work. Again, it tells you the breakdown of all the different fees involved. Click pay the £12 and it takes you back through to that payment screen. The other way of making payments is by invoice, and that's probably the easier way to do it if you do have a lot of different cases that may have come through one week. If you wait until that invoice is raised and then go to the main club dashboard, right down at the bottom, you'll see outstanding invoices, and you can make payment on a specific invoice for that. Again, if I just show you on this one, it will give you a breakdown of all of the different fees. So actually, if you do have, let's say, 5 or 6 cautions on one invoice, but you only want to pay 3 or 4 of them because those are the only cases you've had payment back from the players for, again, you can actually check and uncheck some of these boxes to edit which cases you're paying or which parts of the case you're making payments on. So the final thing I wanted to show quickly was around adding matches. Now, if you remember on that red card case, it showed 2 matches have been applied against it. So I'm going to add the 3rd one and just show you how quickly and easy that is. To access that, you come down to the Matches tab down the left-hand side and click on the blue New Match button in the top right-hand corner. First of all, we select the date. Now, it was a Sunday game, so I'm going to put this as the 8th of November. It will ask you to confirm the team. Oh, this is always helpful. I've just come up with a flag that Internet Explorer has not worked. So let's just see if this reloads quickly. Yeah. So new match, select the date. Ask you to confirm whether the team was home or away, and ask you to pick which team it was. So in this case, it was the BBFA Demo Club men's team. We'll say that they're the home team. It's a league game. It'll ask you to confirm which league it is. If you're in multiple cups, again, you can select the cup competition or FA competitions and so forth, and then you select the opposition. Now, the opposition should be pre-populated with all of the teams within that league that you've already selected. So you just scroll through the list until you find the relevant team. Once you've done that, just click Create, and as I said before, it will automatically assign it to any eligible suspensions. So fingers crossed, click this down here, and yep, you can see that that has been applied against that player's suspension, which started on the 25th of October. If Internet Explorer doesn't crash, as you can see, it's nice, quick, easy, 30-second job really once you have that fixture information in front of you. Before I jump on back into the presentation, were there any questions just around whole game functionality and the information that's available to clubs or any of those processes? Bill, do you want to go ahead? Bill, did you want to ask a question? I've got you unmuted, so you're welcome to talk. Okay, so you're unmuted. You may need to click again if you did want to ask a question. If not, I will move on unless there's anybody else that had a question they wanted to raise quickly. Okay, I'm going to jump back into this. And I just want to, as I said before, touch on those continuing misconduct charges. So clubs will receive charges for accumulation of offences throughout the season by their players. Some of them are automatic charges and sanctions which will be immediately charged to the club by the whole game system without any intervention from the county FA, whilst other ones will be considered on a case-by-case basis by a disciplinary panel. So because of that, it is important the clubs monitor the accumulation of cases throughout the season, as I mentioned earlier. And also, and we're doing a bit of work around this at the county at the moment, but factor some of those into your own internal disciplinary processes. So if we take as the first one, the respect sanctions. If a club accumulates multiple respect sanctions across the course of the season, they may incur additional fines. Now, these are cautions for dissent, red cards for abusive language, or any proven misconduct charge. Now, if you are if you receive a fine as a club and then you pass it on to the player that committed the offence to make payment, you may decide that that player's £40 red card for abusive language, actually internally you should charge him slightly higher, so that if you do pick up one of these respect offences, you've already got that player's contribution towards it, and it's not then coming out of the club account or not being passed on to players that have actually been behaving themselves and haven't contributed towards the accumulation of that debt. So to run through the respective offences, as I said, it's for cautions for dissent, red cards for abusive language, and proven misconduct charges. The thresholds for this are 6, 10, 15, and 20. So after 6 offences, the club will be warned as to their future conduct. After 10 offences, you'll pick up a fine, which again is based on the level of football you play at. If you then get to 15 offences, it's double the fine at the stage 2. And then if you get to 4 respect offences over the course of the season, that will lead to a disciplinary charge from the county FA, which will then be considered by one of our disciplinary panels. What I would say is that if you're a step 5 club and you've had a warning, you've had a stage 2 fine for £150, you've had a stage 3 fine for £300, chances are your outcome from a disciplinary fine for hitting 20 offences is not going to be any less than £300. So again, something to factor into as you are budgeting or planning some of your internal disciplinary procedures throughout the season.
And Alistair, it's Farouk.
Hey, Farouk.
Yeah. So if a player refuses to pay the fine that the club's got, I'll presume we just let you know, and then they'll be suspended from signing for any other team. Is that correct? Or
it is, but it's slightly more complicated than that. Naturally, we have something called the debt recovery process, where if players have failed to pay back clubs for disciplinary offences or other costs that the club's incurred on their behalf, we can take on some of that debt. There is an application process and there is an application fee for that, unfortunately, and there are quite strict timeframes around that. So it's something that I don't want to. I could probably spend like half an hour explaining the debt recovery process. It's so complicated. We do have resources available, and if you are in that position, let us know and we can send those guides to you. Okay. Just make sure you let us know as early as possible. We can't take any action if the debt was incurred more than 112 days before we're notified. So you've got about 3.5 months.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
I'll give a bit of.
Hopefully we won't come to that, but yeah.
Hopefully not. But believe me, it does. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about things you can do within the club to try and avoid that at the end of this. There's also then a couple of other occasions where we raise charges at the county FA. So if a team within a club reaches 75 disciplinary points, and I'll come on to what those are in a moment. If as we mentioned, if a team reaches stage 4 of the respect sanctions. If the club has 2 misconduct cases proven which have led to the abandonment of the match, then you'll receive an additional misconduct charge, or if you accumulate 4 or more incidents of violent conduct. Now, this one in particular is something that the larger clubs need to be wary of. It's probably not within the realms of possibility that a 20-team club that spans under 15s to adult football is going to pick up 4 violent conduct charges across the course of a season, so 4 violent conduct red cards. If that does happen, you'll receive an additional misconduct charge from us, and you will receive an additional fine. They tend to be between about £75 and £150, but they are decision is made on those on a case-by-case basis by one of our panels. So again, if you get a player that gets a red card for violent conduct, factor that in, that there may be additional fees further down the line for associated with that. Glad to say that the final one has we've never had to apply, but if a club has 2 or more discrimination charges against a player within a 12-month period, again, there would be a disciplinary case against the club for that. So I mentioned a charge is raised if a team reaches 75 disciplinary points. Now, every offence carries a points value ranging from 1 for a general caution up to 7 points is our most serious for spitting at an opponent. So if over the course of the season a team hits 75 points total, they'll receive this misconduct charge. So again, the vast majority of our adult male teams will tend to hit this, because over the course of a season, if you're playing 30, 35, 40 games, whatever it may be, you're going to probably pick up a fair few yellow cards. It's just part of football. Pick up a few yellow card a game, pick up a couple of red cards over the course of the season. That 75 points suddenly comes on quite quickly. The other thing to bear in mind is a misconduct charge is always a minimum of 5 disciplinary points, but that can be increased by a commission. So more serious offences, say relating to the abandonment of a game, or for offences against match officials, will lead to higher misconduct disciplinary points, and again make it more likely that you'll hit that 75-point threshold. The final one I was going to touch on is multiplayer misconduct charges. Now, these are applied if a team has 6 or more players cautioned or sent off in a game, and these charges are applied automatically. Again, when you look at the figures we're talking about here, particularly for steps 5 and 6, those prices ratchet up pretty quickly. So if you're a team at step 5 or 6, and you've, for the 4th time in the season, you've had 6 players cautioned or sent off, and that now includes cautions for dissent and stage 1 warnings against your club officials, then you could be looking at, high hundreds of pounds for some of these offences. So again, bear that in mind when you are looking at your own internal disciplinary structures and potential fines and fees internally. We are looking at putting some guidance together just to give some advice to clubs around how to structure yourselves financially to kind of make sure that you're prepared for the potential of these kinds of fines hitting you later on in the season, because what you don't want is a player that's one of 6 players who have been cautioned or sent off in a game who got sent off for violent conduct and then swore at the referee after the red card. Actually, they're suddenly contributing potentially towards a respect offence, a misconduct charge for 4 violent conducts, misconduct charge for 75 points in the season, and a multiplayer misconduct charge. And that player's £50 red card is actually costing the club, proportionately £100 or so. So we want to try and give it some guidance around clubs to make sure that you're aware of these additional fees that may come in, and to offer some advice around how you may want to structure your club and like an internal fine system. And what we try to say is, if you have something left in the kitty at the end of the season, chuck it behind the bar for an end of season party and reward the players for behaving themselves. So, if you sell it to players the right way, that, okay, they may be paying a bit more up front, but it could benefit them at the end of the season if they don't do it again. It may go down slightly better than constantly having to go back to them for money as some of these additional offences kick in. I'm just going to finish up and kind of offer some best practice and advice then for clubs to manage their discipline over the course of the season. The first is to really simply just ask the referee to confirm the cards that they've issued at the end of the game. If you want to make sure you know which players have been cautioned or are listed as having been cautioned or have been sent off and what the offence was, you're going to pick up on some of those potential admin issues, such as the referee putting it under the wrong name or not knowing how long a player is going to be suspended for because you weren't sure of the red card offence. So that helps you pick up on those issues earlier. Also then to keep an eye on the whole game system on a Monday and a Tuesday. For a Saturday game, I'm confident that 90% of our cases will have been charged by a Monday and hopefully 98 by the Tuesday, let's say. But for those rare occasions where they may not have come through from the referee for whatever reason, let us know if you haven't picked up if a player's been sent off the weekend and you haven't received a charge notification from us by about the Wednesday. That gives us enough time to go back to the referee, get clarification from them, make sure it's not just a glitch in the system that means we haven't received the charge, and make sure we can give you the correct information about the offence, about any suspension terms, and pick up, again, prevent the club from potentially playing a player under suspension. Again, acknowledge cases immediately, demonstrated how to do that earlier. We've got about 80% of our teams now registering their players on the whole game system. So the vast majority of the players are going to have their dates of birth and their addresses listed. So it should be a one-click process to acknowledge that case. And then again, pay it as quickly as possible. Appreciate that can be difficult, particularly where clubs are trying to get the money up front from a player. So really, the best advice is to try and keep that ticking over as quickly as possible. So make sure the player's aware as soon as you've got the case confirmation, you know what the fine is. Make sure the player's aware of how much they've got to bring to the game the next week. Collect the money at the game and make the payment online as soon as possible. If it then gets, let's say, to the next week and the player still hasn't paid, sit him on the bench. The biggest incentive to get a player to make payment on something is to stop them from playing. So if you do enforce a strict no pay, no play policy, it'll help you avoid some of those issues that Farouk was mentioning earlier on about players not coming back and giving you payment and then having to chase it, 1, 2, 3, 6 months down the line or whatever it may be. Again, I completely appreciate that's a lot easier said than done, particularly if you've got your manager wanting to play him or you're low on numbers and you need players to play week in, week out. But it's best practice to be encouraged where possible, as I said, and will hopefully prevent some of those issues further down the line. Just going to point your way on some additional resources we've got on our website. If you go onto our homepage, through the rules and regulations and the discipline page, we've got a wealth of resources of one-page reference guides to a lot of these kinds of issues. We've got guides around just red and yellow cards generally, around specific misconduct charges that you may get, how to do appeals for wrongful dismissal and mistaken identity, in reference guides and information around that debt recovery process that I was talking about earlier on. We've tried to put them in as plain language as possible because I'm conscious that the FA handbook is written in glorious legalese a lot of the time, and unless you're living it day in, day out like we are in the office, it can be quite difficult to wade through. So we've tried to break them down into as plain language as possible for you. So please take a look on those. And again, if there's any that are missing or you can't find them on the website, let us know and we'll try and put them together for you and get them sent over as quickly as possible. That is it for the presentation. I'm going to throw it open if there are any questions, but appreciate I've already taken up an hour of your time. So if you don't have any questions or you don't want to stay around to see if any others are raised, just wanted to say thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found it useful. I hope it's been informative and will help you moving forward with managing the club this season. If you do get stuck, please contact us in the office. We've got Alex and Stacey now as kind of our frontline club support officers to try and take you through any of these processes. And you've got myself and Chris Penny as well to help out from a discipline point of view. So hopefully we'll be able to pick up anything that may be getting you stuck. But thank you very much again for joining us. If you've got any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and shout them out. If not, I will see you online shortly, I'm sure.
Thank you, Alistair.
Thanks, guys.